Hello, greetings, bonsoir. Welcome to our philosophy club here in the deepest heart of France, and it's good to bring an update. Today is the, I believe it's the 10th of September, and 2023. So I'll be talking about, the Tower of the Gods and stuff, but first I think there's a couple of questions we'll look at.
Yes, actually, 2 days before today, you went to Paris. Why? What happened?
Okay, so, right, this is fun. It's a chance to share something about philosophy in action. Because philosophy isn't only about theory, obviously, and study and all that. It's about, trying to influence the real world. So, and that's why I used to organise meetings in the UK Parliament, in the House of Lords. I've co-chaired with a Labour Lord back in the 90s and 2000s, about 30 meetings. Trying to get policy shifted, discussing, putting ideas into the minds of people with influence. I've never been a politician myself, never wanted to be, but I've known lots of them, met them and so on. So anyway, I went up to to Paris, to attend a conference lecture at the Sciences Po, which is the equivalent to the LSE in London, where I did part of my degree, which is where, politicians, economists and so on train. And in France, if you have a degree from the Sciences Po, which stands for Sciences Politique, it's a very prestigious degree, and you get guaranteed a job, in the administration somewhere. Anyway, it was to attend a lecture given by the leader of the Indian opposition party, the Congress party, who is a youngish man, very interesting chap called Rahul Gandhi. Rahul was the name of the son of the Buddha, by the way, which is interesting. He's a descendant of Pandit Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of independent India, and who was a close colleague of Mahatma Gandhi. When I lived in London, I worked as the education officer of the Gandhi Foundation for many years, worked with people who'd known Gandhi. So this is like the next generation of the Gandhi oriented party, the Congress party, which has been out of power now for a long time. The ruling coalition or government in India is a party called the BJP. But the powers behind it are something called the RSS. These are a right-wing, neo-fascist, Hindu fascist party. Actually, these are the people that killed Gandhi when he was assassinated, who believe in India for the Hindus, and who weaponize, demonize all non-Hindus in India. It's a very backward-looking and retrograde kind of political movement. I find it incredible that it's legal. The RSS, in my opinion, should be banned. It's a fascist organisation that uses hate speech against minorities. Now, in European countries, that's banned. You can't do that. If somebody in Germany started up the SS, went around the streets of Germany saying death to the Jews or death to the whatever, it wouldn't be allowed. I don't know why they allow it in India. Could it have something to do with the fact they're in the government and running the country? So anyway, Rahul Gandhi's got a huge task. He's got to lead the opposition to get these guys out of power at the general election next year. And he was dealing with, how are we going to do this? He spent quite a long time walking the whole of India from the southern tip way up to the north to meet people, walking on foot, over 1,000, I don't know how many miles, thousands of miles, which is something I could never do. Awesome. It was a very good talk, and he had lots of questions from the audience, who were young students from all over the world. Sciences Po is very multicultural. Lots of Indians had come. There were a couple of Pakistanis and other students from all over the world, asking very difficult questions, which he fielded very well, I have to say. And so anyway, that was that. Afterwards I had, a few minutes chat, and then we went off to a reception organised by the Francophone Indian community in Paris, and I was fortunate to have a long chat with one of his his sort of right-hand man is a guy called Sam Petroda, who invited me to this meeting, who works with my World Intellectual Wisdom Forum. Sam Petroda I've known for 3 or 4 years. He was the eminence grise organising this event, and they'd just come from Brussels the day before. They were off to Rotterdam and Amsterdam to give lectures in Holland today and tomorrow, and then they're going to Oslo to give some talks. So he's doing a whirlwind tour of Europe. I don't know if they're going to Italy or whatever. They ought to, because his mother is Italian. Sonia Gandhi married Rajiv Gandhi, and that's his parents. So he himself is a sort of living testimony to the friendship between Europe and India, which of course the Hindu fanatics hate, because they don't want, alien blood. They want like pure-blooded Hindu going back 20 generations to Rama. So anyway, that was, and I talked to a fascinating young French politician who was a protege, actually, it turns out, of Sam Petroda. I didn't know this. Madame Brune, who had been the Minister of Ecology for Macron. And she knew Macron very well. And we had a long chat about what I thought of Macron. I said I'd written to him a couple of times, always had a polite reply. She was a very close colleague of his. And I said, that's funny, because I quite like him too. He's not extreme right, he's not extreme left. He seems to be doing this bit for Europe. I agree with his policies on pro-European Union, and his sort of, he's a left-centre politician like the Liberal Democrats in Britain, and the kind of Labour Party, which I support. So anyway, we had a really good chat about politics and the world, and what am I doing in the middle of France, etc. And I also told her I'd written to Macron suggesting that France should host the Delphic Games in 2026. So, she'd never heard of them before. But now I suspect that'll get through the grapevine up to, because she's a member of En Marche, which is his party, and he is the president of France. So that was another good excuse for going. Then the next day, I had a longer chat with Rahul Gandhi himself. We had a long chat about philosophy. That was very interesting. So he was saying, Sam Petroda, who was his colleague and who kind of runs the Congress Party abroad, is very scientific in his mindset, and he is an inventor, a genius, an engineer who thinks very technically that, if you can't prove it scientifically, it's not worth discussing, kind of thing. Whereas I'm a philosopher and more into metaphysics, as people know, and I enjoy nothing more than talking about the gods. Well, that's not in Sam Petroda's kind of, worldview. He'll tolerate it, but it's not something that he thinks is important. But what was interesting is Rahul Gandhi immediately picked up on this and said, actually, Thomas, you are right, because if we abandon all religious and theological discourse to the fanatical hard right, who have this discourse about Hinduism is the only religion, and to be Indian you have to be a fanatical Hindu. Well, what about the millions of Christian Indians? What about the millions and millions of Muslim Indians? What about the Jains? What about the Buddhists? What about the Theosophists? What about the Freemasons? The periodic table. The Sikhs, what about them? What about the Parsis, the Zoroastrians, of which his ancestral line is partly Parsi. His great-grandfather, I think, was a Parsi, a Zoroastrian, who are a very ancient part of Indian culture. And then there's a strong Jewish community in India. So what we agreed on is no, you can't say, no, I'm not going to talk about religion, because then the other guys will whip up the mob with very simplistic theological views. You have to have a much more sophisticated discourse about a multicultural India, a multifaith India, which tolerates and respects all the traditions. And that is actually the authentic Hindu message, which was about non-violence and tolerance, and seeing everything as a path to the one ultimate reality. And Rahul gets that. So we got on really well, and we're going to stay in touch. And he wants help in how to combat this very unintelligent discourse about there's only one way to truth, and that's our parties, our religion. And I said, look, this is the problem. It's been, this kind of oversimplistic thinking has taken over in philosophical circles in India, but also in Israel, where Netanyahu's doing the same. You have to be Jewish to belong to Israel. You know, Palestinians, they don't count. Christians, no, you're only Jewish counts. And Jewish religious, that's what some of their extreme parties are saying, which is why they're denying any rights to the Palestinians. And Rahul is very mindful of the Palestinian, you know, tragedy that's happening. Also, it's happening in Putin's Russia, where he's weaponized Christianity as a kind of a sort of Russian fascism. You have to be Orthodox Christian to be a proper Russian. Come and fight. And it happened in Britain with the Tory party weaponizing Brexit as a sort of fantasy of British nationalism. And, you know, what's so sad in Britain is to see many of the multicultural immigrant community all standing up and cheering because they're then given placements by the Tory party and groomed for, you know, Little Britain's kind of, you know, paraphernalia of pseudo patriotism. But it's the same phenomena. And in each case, it's premised on an oversimplification of the boundaries between us and them. There is no us and them, it's just us. So Rahul Gandhi understands all this, and we had a really interesting exchange. And I expect, and I promised to send him my periodic table of the world's religions, which I will be sending him, you know, as a guide to make sense of all this, to help rebuild after this period of oversimplification that Modi's BJP government has brought in, and the RSS. Get back to business as usual, which is the propagandian approach to truth. You know, there are many paths to truth, and the real truth is finding a formula whereby they can coexist in harmony. So that was the political bit of my trip to Paris, which was great.
That's quite something.
Yeah, it's philosophy in action, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And next to all that, what else have you been up to?
Well, I couldn't resist it. So on the next day, on Saturday, I'd been wanting to visit a museum in Paris, which I'd never been to before. It's been on my, you know, list for ever since I moved here, really. It's called the Musee de Cluny, and it's the French medieval history museum for culture and the arts. And it's in a very beautiful old part of Paris, the left bank. It was the student quarter from medieval times onwards, just off the Boulevard Saint-Michel and near to the Sorbonne. And it's where the old university, you know, students have been in Paris since the 1100s. And the great monastery at Cluny, which is not far from here in Burgundy, which I visited, it's now a museum. You can't see the old monastery standing. The French revolutionaries knocked it down. It was the biggest church, and one of the biggest in Europe, sadly. But the bishops of Cluny built a building in Paris where they would stay when they were in Paris, called the Hotel de Cluny. And it's been there for, you know, 800 years or something. And it's amazing. I loved it. It has a beautiful courtyard, which is, there's a cafe there. And it's now a museum dedicated to the entire history of France's medieval culture. With, yeah, a huge amount of sculptures, paintings, wooden, like, you know, triptychs, so paintings on wood. Beautiful, fine detail. And some amazing altarpieces made of gold and overlaid onto wood, so like embossed bas-relief figures, and even some sculptures from Nottingham, from England, in alabaster, showing scenes from the life of Christ, lots of jewels. I was interested by the influence of Siena on French art in the Middle Ages, from Italy. Some very fine work by French inspired Italian, you know, trained artists. And it was just like going back 800 years, 900 years, and entering a different world, which I feel totally comfortable in because I, as an academic scholar, trained in the university. I mean, it was the University of Paris that was the first university in Europe, although Bologna sometimes makes the claim, but Bologna was a place for lawyers. Paris was the beginning of theology, which is my field, and philosophy. And it was founded really by Abelard, the first intellectual in the West to try and integrate Aristotelian logic, the school of Apollo, going back to ancient Greece, with the Bible and biblical studies. And, his lectures were very, very popular, and thousands of students would come. And that was really the beginning of the University of Paris. So it felt like being home. The masterpiece in the collection, which is what drew me to visit, and that's why it's on my list. Here near where I live is a place called Boussac with a castle, and it used to have this famous tapestry of the lady with the unicorn, which is like a motif for this region of Boussac, and this is one of the most famous tapestries in French history, and I knew it was now in Cluny Museum. So I wanted to see the original. And it's there, it's in room 20, it's absolutely amazing. What I didn't know is there are 6 huge tapestries. They're all displayed in this really huge room, beautifully lit. And it shows like an allegory. This is a booklet describing, what it's about. The whole thing seems to be an allegory of the 5 senses. You have this gorgeous woman with a unicorn in each of the 6 tapestries, which are huge. They're like, 5 meters by 5 meters in size each. One represents hearing, one represents sight, one represents touch, one represents taste, one represents smell. So it's all the 5 senses. And the 6th is thought to represent purified intellect, which sees everything from all the senses and then integrates and makes sense of it. And so the whole is a series of, it's an allegorical assemblage of tapestries teaching a moral lesson. And if you were a rich lord in medieval France, you'd commission this thing for, £1 million or whatever it cost, and then have it in your big living room. Absolutely amazing. And there's some speculation by one scholar that it was inspired by a French translation by Symphorien Champier, published in 1503, of a commentary on Plato's Symposium, which had been written by the Florentine philosopher Marsilio Ficino, written in Latin at the Medici court in Florence in 1468. Now, Ficino is one of my intellectual heroes as a philosopher. And this was then translated into French, and in a sense the tapestry is a sort of representation of its argument. So it's an allegorical piece. That's one interpretation. There are other theories, but I quite like that one. Awesome to go there. And of course then I had to visit the bookshop on the way out. And I just want to share a couple of things I found. So this is an amazing book of medieval France. They had a superb little collection of books on France in the medieval period. And France is absolutely full of these incredible treasures. Buildings, chateaux, tapestries. This is the sort of medieval courtyard that is at Cluny. That's where I was having tea a couple of days ago. And the churches. Here's Bourges, which is one of the great cathedrals of France. I've been there. France is like a living museum, the whole thing, of these beautiful places. Here's a typical window from medieval France. These people are master builders and artists, and it was all done with a spiritual intent. It was to raise the soul back to its home, to its communion with God, with the higher divine mind, if you want, or the divine intelligence, as I call it, which is the creator. And all these amazing sculptures and architectural drawings, they were to reawaken the soul back to its divine home. So that's an amazing book which I found. This was another amazing book. This is one of my heroes as a boy was always Richard Coeur de Lion, who was the English king, Richard the Lionheart, we call him. And this is an amazing prospectus of a exhibition that took place a few years ago now, where all the world's leading experts on Richard's reign wrote papers, they all produced works, and they exhibited in the exhibition all the stuff to do with his life. He had this vision. He was a very successful crusader. He, won some battles, which was quite rare in those days, against the Muslim forces. And he wanted to do a deal with Saladin, who was the great Islamic leader. He said, look, and they actually talked to each other, and respected each other as great knights. He said, Saladin, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't fight about this, like who controls Jerusalem. Let's internationalize it and make it an international city. And we'll guarantee its safety, and Christians, Muslims, and Jews can live there in peace. What's wrong with that idea, And Saladin, I think, was up for it. The trouble was, it never got put in place. And I still think that Richard Lionheart's idea for internationalising Jerusalem and all the religions of the world able to go and have part of it and be there, and then that would be a truly holy city, in my view. Which I think was Richard's point. So anyway, that was a great find, a huge thing about Richard. And then the most incredible thing I found is this book, which I feel like I've done a raid on Paris, and this is the treasure I brought back. This is illustrated, it's in French, illustrated codices, the most beautiful illuminated manuscripts of the world between 400 and 1600 AD. And it's a beautifully illustrated, a couple of pages each of these illustrated manuscripts that the Middle Ages were all about. This is from the famous Irish Book of Kells, as well as the architecture, the churches, the sculptures, the paintings. I think the great glory of medieval Europe were these illustrated books, which were all hand done by monks in their monasteries and scribes. They were hand painted, right? This is long before printing, for 1,000 years. And these little drawings and paintings are miniature masterpieces, illustrating the text, giving like allegorical meanings for the text. And this is, this volume gives 374 of the most important medieval illustrated manuscripts discovered in Europe, which some of them I'd never heard of. And it gives a detailed text explaining what's in the text and gives samples of the illustrations. It also includes from the Islamic world some of their great illustrated manuscripts, and the Jewish world, because they were going on at the same time. Although Islam is not supposed to make representations, actually they were cheating, putting them in the manuscripts. And so this is like 1,000 books within one book. And many of these manuscripts, which are all worth a fortune, I mean they're worth millions, they're in libraries all over Europe and worldwide. So it was like a peek into the medieval mind at its best, because the scribes who were writing these things down, and some of them were from the classical era, so there are manuscripts of Virgil, the great poet, who inspired Dante, with illustrations. The Virgilius Vaticanus is a famous manuscript. It gives samples made in Rome in about 400 AD, for instance. So that was another great find. I'm really grateful to the Musee de Cluny, whoever stocks the bookshop. Thank you for getting that book in. And these were all not very expensive. I mean, if you're in Paris and get a chance, go to the Musée Cluny and spend a whole day there. It's well worth it. So that's what I did in Paris. I did, I just totally fell in love with it again, and I went to the Sorbonne, and that whole region of the old academic heartland of Paris is still thriving and heaving with students and people. I went into a couple of other bookshops, of course, and I could have spent a whole week up there, but I had a ticket booked last night on the last train from Paris, so I had to come back. But yeah, thank you. That was great.
Super.
Yeah. Okay, now I think we're going to move on and do a couple of the tarot. We'll play the game of gods.
All right.
Okay. So you choose one, then I'll choose one, and we'll see what we get.
Yahweh Adonai.
Okay, there we are. That's your one. Let me have the deck and I'll choose. Right. Okay, so we had Yahweh a few sessions ago, but he is happy to be here again. He's obviously a very important deity in Judaism and in Christianity, and he's the number 2 of the major arcana, which in some traditions is called the High Priestess. And esoterically, Judaism is handed down through the feminine line. You know, you're Jewish if your mother was Jewish. It's a feminine tradition, and that's why he's associated with the High Priestess in the tarot, because in the occult world, it carries that divine energy. And Yahweh's consort is the Shekinah, who's the feminine aspect of Yahweh. But this is all, you know, higher Kabbalistic knowledge. And he's associated in this tarot deck with introversion going within the subconscious. So it's going on the inner journey. And a lot of Jewish people have been very good at psychology. Obviously, if you look at the history of psychology, Freud and many others, Abraham Maslow and some of the greatest explorers of the unconscious, Wilhelm Reich, they've all been Jewish, and I think it's because they're in tune with this introverted introspection. And that is also where prophetic consciousness comes from. So if you look at the history of prophecy, the prophetic mind, and you look at the Bible, it's full of people like Daniel, Joseph, who were in touch, often through their dreams, with God, with the divine intelligence, who would then receive dream images and had the ability to interpret them. So Yahweh brings all this, the inner knowledge. I explain in the text where the word probably came from. May well have been the secret moon god of Egyptian religion, known as Yahweh, or Yah-Khonsu later, who then became associated with Thoth, the moon god, and the god of knowledge and wisdom and learning. The Zohar says, which is the main text of the Kabbalah, when the Holy One, blessed be He, created the world, He did so by means of the secret power of letters. The letters were shaken before Him, and He created the world by the tracing of the holy name. So the Kabbalah and the Zohar is all about studying the letters, the shape of the letters, the meaning, the inner meaning of the words. Well, that's all Thoth country. That's what scribes do. Of course, the scribe will say God is the creator through letters. You know, an airline pilot would say, no, God created the world with rockets or whatever. You know, it's all everyone sees in the glass of their own divine imagining. But as a scribe myself, I'm totally in tune with Zohar's idea, and therefore love Yahweh, who's also known as Adonai. You can't pronounce the name Yahweh, which means pure existence, pure being. Why can't you say pure being? Because everything is. My notebook is, the book is, the table is, the film is, my words are. Well, what's the word for the thing that they all are? That's within them all. I can say cup, book, pen, but how can I speak the name that everything is? Everythingness, existingness, beingness, Yahweh. Well, that's the proper pronunciation. It means, you know, that which is. It's a beautiful sound, like a flowing river, of divine energy. Okay, that's that card. Now, the next one, the one I got, is the Nine of Fire, Horus, which is a fire suit. We've had this one before as well, so they've sort of come back. But and he's an important deity, Horus. And I explained how in some traditions, like Thelema, associated with Crowley, they believe we're now entering the age of Horus. Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis, and was there to take revenge on the killing of his father, Osiris. He was there to bring God's justice into the world. He's symbolized by the hawk that flies into the sun. And he was worshipped throughout the whole of Eastern Egyptian religions. Sometimes associated with the falcon, in fact. It's interesting that falcons appear in the Musee de Cluny because it was a sport used by the French aristocrats in medieval times, and to have falcons and go on a falcon hunt, meant you were really quite important. Well, I just happened to see that in modern day Dubai, it's also, they're doing falcon hunting, and they love it so much as sport that on the plane system running different parts of the country, you can book a seat for your falcon, your bird of prey. So, they take up a whole seat, they have a little perch, and they get water and stuff during the flight. And it's a big thing. The Arabs are still doing their falcon hunts, just as they did in ancient Egypt. And the Arab culture is very similar, ultimately, to the ancient Egyptian. It's a descendant of it. And Muhammad was a descendant partly of Hagar, the Egyptian consort of Abraham. And they're proud of this Egyptian side to their culture. Horus was the victor who becomes the patron of the pharaohs and brings justice and maintains justice in the land. And he has to protect the people from evil, from Set, and has to keep fighting Set again and again. It's interesting because I had a funny dream last night. I'm having lots of deep dreams, and coming back from Paris, I was dreaming about the Antichrist. I suddenly realised that I have to write a book about how to defeat the Antichrist, because the Antichrist takes many forms, this form, that form, and to look historically at what the Antichrist is, what is it? Is it a psychological thing? Is it Set reborn? I thought it'd be a really interesting study to do. And anyway, I had that dream last night, and I think it was because I was inspired by the legacy of the intellectuals in medieval France. That's what they were thinking. How do we defeat the evil? And it's still not gone away. We're now fighting Putin. This is definitely a sort of antichrist view of history, that you destroy everyone that you don't agree with. Brexit was another thing, and what Modi is doing is the same. What Netanyahu is doing in Israel is the same. This is, you see, I call it the antichrists, plural, come in many shapes and forms nowadays. It's the half-truth. It's the lie. It's the deceit that's now become established in politics. Whereas Christ stood for truth and candor and honesty. Well, that's no longer fashionable. Everyone lies, it seems. And that's the problem Gandhi faced. That's why he was killed. And Rahul Gandhi, who's trying to reactivate that truth essence within us all. How can we bring back truth to either politics or spirituality or religion? Well, we have to defeat the antichrists.